The next presentation is going to be one that's a little bit different from these, and we'll welcome Dr. Norma Pepperstein she's our out-of-state person who's with us today. Dr. Haverstein is the Daniel L. Ritchie Endowed Chair in Gifted Education at the University of Denver. And Norma is a colleague and friend of mine, and her role with the document that she's going to share with you is that she was chairing this initiative for the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. So welcome to our Kentucky group, Norma. We are so happy to have you here. And I'm going to turn this over to you. And then when we get to a point, if we do that, we have questions, I'll entertain those with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts and Dr. Clark, for inviting me to be here today. It is a pleasure to be able to share this information with all of you. And so thank you. I look forward to our time together. Tyler, if you'd be kind enough to move to the next slide, that'd be great. In 2019, the World Council sent out a call for members interested in participating in this work. And this call was literally sent across the globe. We were thrilled to have 67 applications from 30 different countries. And certainly, as you can imagine, it was a difficult decision to select committee members. But in February of 2020, we had 17 global committee members selected and 3 additional World Council Executive Committee members to make up this work. And on the next slide, you can see the participants literally from across the globe. We had folks from Lebanon to New Zealand, from Jamaica to India, from Italy to Hong Kong, Scotland to Slovenia, Egypt to the USA, Israel to Canada, the UAE to Africa, Hungary to Turkey, and more. And one of the things that we were thrilled about was we wanted to hear the voices from those folks from across the globe. And a couple of quick quotes that I want to share from these folks, because all of them were so passionate about gifted education, regardless of their setting, regardless of the place in which they were serving young gifted learners. Gifted and talented learners are found in every group in society and should be offered a curriculum rich in depth and breadth and at a pace commensurate with their abilities. There is unmet need to bring more theory and practice regarding gifted learners into students' undergraduate teacher preparation programs. And gifted education ranges widely in teacher training requirements based on mandates and funding, from fully funding and fully participating to none at all, as you might imagine. I loved this quote: avoid teaching children what they already know. Never impose our limits on what children can learn. So with that passion that was present, our process included several meetings. We gathered rounds of data from folks from across the globe. We had Google Docs and gathered information. We had 2 virtual focus groups held at various times in the day and night so that we could involve all of our participants from around the world. And then as we gathered that final draft, we had a writing team that created that final polished version. And in July of 2021, we just released our global principles for professional learning in gifted education. And it is a pleasure to be able to share those global principles with you. The need for these principles was really evident from all of those with whom we spoke, in that we rely on the contributions of gifted and talented adults, but educators worldwide receive little information on truly how to educate gifted and talented children. And so these global principles are intended to help remedy this gap in educator preparation by providing both policy and practice in professional learning. So these principles there are 10 of them, and they're organized in a variety of ways. The first thing that's important to recognize is that educators, just like students, like all learners, need tiered content. We recognize that all educators need some work with gifted students in some way. So all educators need some degree of professional preparation. And then some educators may need much more. And as many of you have spoken about your work this morning, those levels of differentiation need to happen with adults educating students as well. The second principle is evidence-based. Obviously, we want all professional learning to be based on the research so that we are taking that theory and putting it into good practice so that we can better serve children and their families. The third principle is holistic. So professional learning and gifted education should really consider the whole child, including academic and social and emotional needs. One of the things that we heard from various educators from around the globe is sometimes it's easy to provide just one piece of this, perhaps just an acceleration component, and the passion, especially actually from our colleagues in New Zealand, around considering the whole child, recognizing the social emotional needs, those sensitivities, those intensities that are present in gifted learners, that professional learning should address that as well. The fourth principle is that this professional learning should be broad. So it's not like there's just any one way. I remember years ago, someone said to me, "Can you describe a typical gifted child?" And my response was, there isn't such a thing as typical gifted child. We might have characteristics, but each child is unique in and of themselves. And to recognize that, professional learning also needs to include information about different levels of giftedness, different forms of giftedness, thinking about the different kinds of learners that we have, thinking about a student who might be gifted in science or gifted in math, or a student who has a high level of ability with languages or in reading. Varying methods of identification, also really, really critical. And different program models, as well as options for modifying curriculum and instruction. So just like there isn't a typical gifted child, there may not be a typical gifted program as well, and professional learning should reflect that in addition. Educators from across the globe were passionate about gifted professional learning being equitable. That gifted education professional learning should address the needs of students from different racial, cultural, ethnic, indigenous groups, genders, and sexual orientations. And there was passion about recognizing the need to recruit and retain educators from representative diverse backgrounds as well, so that students feel comfortable with their teachers, even administrators, so that idea of equitable is present in professional learning, addressing children and educators alike. As you might imagine, the global principle of comprehensive was essential and important. Many school personnel, not just teachers, but counselors, administrators, psychologists, special educators, thinking about our twice exceptional students as well, interact with our gifted learners. And so professional learning should be encompassing a comprehensive look at all educators interacting with gifted students as well. That was a really critical component in our dialogue with educators across the globe, that it's teachers and counselors and psychologists and special education professionals and administrators. And that's reflected in this next principle as well, in that this principle focuses on integral. Professional learning should be present in gifted education so that the entire school program recognizes the needs of gifted learners and gifted programming, not just the specific educator responsible for serving gifted students. One of the things that we heard literally from across the globe was that in some settings, the gifted coordinator is responsible for all of the aspects that are part of gifted programming. And this principle really encourages all of us to think about professional learning in an integral way so that gifted education is part of the entire school community, so that it is integral to the day-to-day experiences, both for the students and for the educators overall. And any of us in education, I think, recognize that there's always something new to learn every day. So professional learning should be ongoing. Professional learning in gifted education provides ongoing opportunities to refine and extend existing knowledge and skills. And that might be through in-service programs or professional learning. It might be something that is provided on a day-to-day basis. It might be a special session. It might be the opportunity to come to a conference and interact with other educators. It might be the very thing that we're doing today, and having that opportunity to experience professional learning in an ongoing way. And recognizing that all of us have the opportunity to learn something new and something more, so that we can be better able to serve our gifted learners. The 9th principle is sustainable. Professional learning and gifted education should be built into the educational policy of the state or the region or the province or the country. Recognizing that we were literally working with educators from across the globe, our emphasis in this was that regardless of the level, whether it's at a state or an individual school or an entire country, that professional learning and gifted education should be sustainable, and that those programs should be monitored regularly, and that an accountability system should be in place. It's not enough to just do something one time, but rather to continue and to make sure that those professional learning opportunities are sustainable and that they exist broadly over time. And to have that accomplished, that there's a requirement for collaboration to be among all stakeholders. And I see that in your state very much, that policymakers and school authorities and community members, higher education faculty, all collaborate together so that there is a recognition, first of all, of the need for services for gifted learners, for professional learning to be sustainable and to exist over time. And for that to occur, it takes all of those stakeholders of all kinds working together so that it can be sustainable. And our last principle is empowering. This was a fascinating principle to work on with our colleagues from across the globe. I think many of us here in the United States think empowering, well, we should just be saying advocacy. We want to advocate. We want to advocate for professional learning. We want to advocate for educators to be better able to advocate for their students. And it was fascinating to see the differences across the globe and how that word itself was interpreted. So the word that we could agree on from an international perspective was empowering. So professional learning and gifted education should prepare educators to be effective supporters, promoting gifted students and the services they require. So empowering, advocating for students themselves. So as you can see, these 10 principles, and I know Tyler has, I think he's shared it in the chat already. We have these principles in a one-page, almost a poster that you can share with your colleagues, with your principals, perhaps, if you need to advocate or empower in your own building, or to share perhaps with colleagues in higher education as well. So we are encouraging across the globe a call to action. So those of you who are here today, share this information widely. And it's that quote again, every child deserves to learn something new at school every day. And these children deserve to learn from teachers prepared to deliver this curriculum using the most effective strategies. So we're having a call to action for all of you today. Policymakers should adopt policies that mandate inclusion and gifted education in teacher education programs. Institutions of higher ed have a critical role, and you are fortunate to have that commitment there in your state as well. Educational leaders and organizations should invest in education of gifted students, clearly, and experts in both gifted and talented education and teacher education overall should collaborate in the next step of this is to develop teacher standards that include gifted education and teacher education programs. So the next steps would be to consider your own particular setting. So perhaps you conduct a needs assessment in your own particular setting. It might be formal or informal. See what would be most well received, thinking about that empowering lens, and perhaps develop a strategic plan to move forward the idea of professional learning that meets all those principles that we've shared with you today. And you all are fortunate to have Dr. Clark and Dr. Roberts there at the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children to help move this forward. So I thank you so much for having the opportunity to share this information. I want to just again highlight Dr. Roberts and Dr. Clark and the World Council for the opportunity to work on this project. What a tremendous experience it was to interact with educators literally from across the globe, all of who are passionate about gifted learners and professional learning for educators to better serve our students. So thank you, and I will turn it back to Dr. Roberts or answer any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, it's Tyler, it's not letting. Oh, there it goes. Thank you for sharing. I happen to think these 10 principles are so important and that they can make such a big difference in what we do. I hope that everyone who's on this update today will see this as their responsibility to share this information because professional learning is key. And let me share just the reason that I think it is so important. Kentucky has had gifted children as a category of exceptional children for 30 years. We have law that says that all of our gifted children, no, all of our exceptional children, with gifted children being one of those, will have an individual education plan, which we have called a gifted student services plan. Every time I'm working with teachers, I find teachers who've never heard that gifted children are a category of exceptional children or that there is a GSSP. We have a huge professional learning opportunity that's out there, but that's going to be filled only when lots of people take responsibility for doing that. Norma, you mentioned that you think teacher standards should be a piece that follows this. And I would use this as the opportunity to say that the Association for the Gifted, which is a division of Council for Children, is currently revising the teacher standards for gifted and talented children. So we hope by this time next summer that we will have the revised teacher standards in place.
Wonderful.
So that's something that's currently going on. Tyler, are there questions in the chat about the principles?
I am not seeing any questions, but I would like to add that we will be having hard copies available of the document and the posters. So if that would be useful to you all, send me an email so that we can get you on the list. We are finalizing a few things to make that happen, but we can get that to you hopefully by the end of the year.
Good. I think that's so exciting. All right, Norma, if we were to think of step one for gifted coordinators in various school districts, what would you think the use of the guiding principles would be for step one for them?
Well, actually, I think that one of the things that we've talked about in the committee was on one of those last slides where perhaps there's an informal needs assessment. So just as you mentioned that you're interacting with teachers and you find teachers that don't know that there's the requirement for gifted students to be part of the exceptional students and the GSSP, which is what you use in Kentucky and Colorado, we call it an ALP, an advanced learning plan. And so just as we're recognizing that there are teachers who have the need for more professional learning. So gifted coordinators, I would encourage to do an informal needs assessment, not only with the people with whom you work most frequently, but perhaps those with whom you don't interact as frequently and you don't interact as often. Maybe you host a coffee and have people come in and just have an informal dialogue to have a way for you to gain more information about what they really know. And then that gives you a specific starting point in your particular setting. Then what needs to happen? One of the things that we found very much in our conversations with committee members from across the globe were some assumptions that educators who may not have the professional learning, these assumptions that these educators make about our gifted learners, that gifted learners will make it on their own, or gifted learners will be fine. And these principles give us the opportunity to guide the process collaboratively with educators by providing that professional learning opportunity in a more informal way.
Scary as it is, the myths seem to be holding true all around the globe, not just in Bowling Green, Kentucky, or Kentucky or Colorado.
Right.
Those seem to be something that over time have quite a bit of staying power. And we regret that, of course. And professional learning is the only thing that will winnow that down so that people have the right information about young people with gifts and talents.
Norma, there's another question from Bryn. She's specifically referencing Principle 9, sustainability. What is a recommended frequency of monitoring regularly, and what are components for good accountability systems?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you so much. Certainly, one of the things that is embedded in that sustainability principle is relevance to your particular setting. And one of the things that we are learning in Colorado as well, and we too have a Javits grant, is that if we can embed, and we talked about integral as another principle, this work into the overall structure of the school, it allows it to happen more easily rather than it being seen as an add-on or a separation. So I would absolutely encourage at the very minimum an evaluation component that is at least annual, and that data would be collected at multiple times over the year and from multiple sources. So maybe you're gathering data from families, maybe you're gathering data from other educators in the building, maybe you're gathering data from principals. So that your monitoring is embedded in what you already do. And so then you're actually just looking at it. You already have the data, you already have it all collected, and you'll be able to see at the end of the year, oh geez, we have a gap here. Maybe there's a gap in social emotional. That was one of the things that we heard from many folks across the globe. So we need to do some more programming around that. Or we think we're doing a good job as educators, but in fact, it's not being perceived that way by the students themselves, if they're high school students or middle school students, or the families. So ongoing evaluation and monitoring, and then at the very minimum, an annual review of it. Julia, what do you think? Do you see that similarly or different?
I really do see it very similarly to what you have stated, Norma, because the more natural it is, the more likely it is to occur.
Right, right.
This isn't a question, but Trish has put in the comments. It would seem that gifted coordinators could use the data from the annual program review to guide improving these types of issues. For example, asking stakeholders such as teachers, administrators, and families what topics of learning might help growth. So I think that's a good comment.
That's a great idea. So you're inviting their participation. You're asking them for their own perceived need. The other thing that is interesting that we've learned from working with districts across the state in Colorado, one of our partners in one of her comments said, "We didn't know what we didn't know." And so sometimes we're inviting information, and yet folks may need to help guide some of that as well. And sometimes it's fun just to do an analysis of those myths that Julie was talking about, and using those myths as a way to get dialogue started. But great comment from Trish. Thank you.
And Norma, this wasn't a question that was asked. I'm going to ask it to you. I know it's addressed in the document, but I don't know that it was addressed in the presentation. These are listed 1 through 10 principles. Do we need to start with principle 1 and work our way through principle 10? Do we need to have them all in place at the same time? What are your recommendations for that?
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. So if we take apart each, just the initial word and look at them, they're designed to be expansive in the way we think of them. So if we go back and even think about our first principle, tiered content, we're calling out the need for differentiation even in our professional learning. So all educators need some kind of information, and some educators need much more. Evidence-based would certainly be something that we want to have in place for all of them. And as you go through each of these, they're broadening in the lens with which they are being applied in the particular situation. Obviously, we look at all of these things, and then we get to empowering, or that idea of advocacy at the very end. So ideally, we want all of them, and we want all of them right now. So Julia and Tyler, perhaps you can help your colleagues do that. What do you think?
I think it's a great challenge.
And I think that takes care of the questions that are in the chat right now. But if you all think of questions, you can email Julia or me, or even Dr. Havenstein.
Well, Norma, thank you ever so much for joining us from Colorado today. I think this is a resource that will be very valuable to all of us, and that it can be used in different ways. And I hope that individuals who use the document will share back with us how they've used it, and perhaps we can then suggest that to others. We want it to make a difference.
Absolutely. And thank you again for allowing me to share this information, and best wishes to all of you as you empower your colleagues to make a difference. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.